The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when Desmond Calloway signed his name at the bottom and slid them across the mahogany table without once looking up at the woman who had shared his bed for 6 years, and it was that same cold indifference, that refusal to meet her eyes, that told Amara Whitfield everything she needed to know about how little she had ever truly mattered to him. Before we continue, if you believe that a person's worth is never determined by where they come from, and that true character always finds its way to the surface, hit that like button, leave a comment, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own value, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House for more stories about resilience, dignity, and second chances. Amara had met Desmond 8 years earlier at a charity gala in downtown Chicago, back when she was working 2 jobs, one as a receptionist at a modest architectural firm during the day and another waiting tables at a steakhouse on weekends, saving every spare dollar to finish her design portfolio. She had grown up in a small apartment on the South Side, raised by a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night and still found the energy to help Amara with her sketches every evening, telling her that talent didn't care about zip codes. Desmond, on the other hand, had inherited his family's real estate empire, a sprawling fortune built over 3 generations, and when he first saw Amara laughing with the catering staff that night, unafraid to help carry trays when a waiter twisted his ankle, something in him had softened in a way his mother would later describe, with thinly veiled disapproval, as reckless. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony that Desmond's family barely attended, his mother Eleanor sitting stiffly in the front row with an expression that made clear she considered the entire event a temporary lapse in judgment her son would eventually correct. For the first few years, Desmond seemed to shield Amara from his family's coldness, insisting that her background, her ambition, her fire, were exactly what he loved about her. She continued designing in her spare time, filling notebooks with sketches of interiors that blended warmth with elegance, dreaming of one day opening her own studio. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth in Desmond's eyes began to shift into something more calculating, more embarrassed, especially whenever his business partners or his mother's society friends were present. The comments started small. He would introduce her at events with a slight hesitation, as though searching for the right words to soften who she was. He stopped inviting her to certain dinners, claiming they would be boring for her, though she later learned those were the very rooms where partnerships and fortunes were discussed. Eleanor's remarks grew sharper over the years, comments about Amara's clothing being more suited to her old neighborhood, about her not understanding how things worked in their world, and Desmond, rather than defending his wife, would simply change the subject, his silence its own quiet betrayal. Amara absorbed each slight, telling herself that love required patience, that Desmond's discomfort was his family's failing and not his own, until the night everything finally broke. It happened at Eleanor's 70th birthday celebration, held in a ballroom glittering with crystal chandeliers and 300 of the city's wealthiest guests. Amara had spent weeks designing and sewing subtle embellishments onto a gown herself, wanting to contribute something personal to the evening despite the vast wealth surrounding her. When Eleanor unwrapped Amara's gift, a hand-painted portrait Amara had commissioned of Eleanor's late husband from an old photograph, Eleanor's face twisted with something between confusion and disdain, and she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, that she hadn't realized people from Amara's background even understood fine art. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the nearest tables, and Amara, her chest tightening with humiliation, turned to Desmond, waiting for him to say something, anything, in her defense. He said nothing. He simply reached for his champagne glass and took a slow sip, his eyes fixed somewhere across the room, and in that silence, Amara understood with devastating clarity that she had spent 6 years loving a man who was ashamed of her. 3 weeks later, Desmond sat her down and told her, in the same flat, business-like tone he used with his associates, that their marriage had run its course, that they had simply grown into different worlds, and that perhaps it was best for both of them to return to where they truly belonged. He never once said the word beneath, but Amara heard it in every syllable he didn't speak. She left that mansion with 2 suitcases and her sketchbooks, moving into a small studio apartment above a bakery in a neighborhood far from the manicured lawns of Desmond's world. For months, she allowed herself to grieve, not just the marriage but the years she had spent shrinking herself to fit into spaces that were never built to hold her. But grief, she discovered, could be transformed, and one sleepless night, surrounded by unpacked boxes, she pulled out her old design notebooks and began sketching again, pouring every ounce of pain and clarity into interiors that felt honest, warm, and unapologetically bold. She used the small settlement from the divorce, money she had almost refused out of pride, to rent a tiny studio space and began taking on clients, first small residential projects for families in her old neighborhood who couldn't afford traditional design fees, then gradually larger commissions as word of her distinctive style spread. Her work carried a rare quality, rooms that felt like they were telling a story, spaces built with both beauty and soul, and within 2 years, Amara Whitfield Design had become one of the most talked about boutique firms in the city. She poured herself into every project, mentored young designers from backgrounds like her own, and slowly rebuilt not just a career but an entire sense of self that Desmond's world had tried to convince her didn't deserve a seat at the table. The turning point came when a major national magazine, one dedicated to architecture and design, chose to feature Amara for their annual list celebrating the most innovative voices reshaping American interior design. The shoot took place over 2 bright, sunlit days in a restored brownstone Amara had transformed into a showcase of her work, and the resulting cover image captured her standing confidently in the doorway of a sunlit living room she had designed herself, dressed in a tailored emerald suit, her natural curls framing a face that radiated the quiet strength of someone who had rebuilt herself from nothing. The headline read simply, "The designer who refused to disappear." Desmond saw the magazine on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting on the glass coffee table of his new penthouse, placed there by his assistant who had no idea of its significance. He had remarried within a year of the divorce, a woman from a family Eleanor approved of instantly, but the marriage felt hollow in ways he rarely allowed himself to examine. When his eyes landed on the cover, he froze completely, the coffee cup in his hand suspended halfway to his lips, because the woman staring back at him with unshakable confidence was unmistakably Amara, the same woman his mother had once mocked in a ballroom, the same woman he had once called beneath him. He read the article 3 times that afternoon, learning for the first time the full scope of what she had built, the clients she now worked with, the recognition she had earned entirely on her own terms, without his name, his money, or his family's approval attached to any of it. Something cracked open in him that day, a slow and painful realization that the very qualities he had once been too weak to defend, her resilience, her authenticity, her refusal to be diminished, were the exact qualities that had carried her to a place he, with all his inherited wealth, had never earned for himself. If this story has moved you in any way, if it reminded you that your worth was never meant to be defined by someone else's approval, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and let us know in the comments how this story made you feel. Before we close this chapter, we have a special request. If you have ever had to rebuild yourself after someone made you feel small, type the word, rise, in the comments below. We read every single one, and we want you to know you are seen. Desmond attempted to reach out once, sending a brief, awkward message congratulating Amara on the feature, but she never replied, not out of bitterness, but because she simply no longer needed his validation to know her own value. Amara Whitfield Design continued to grow over the following years, eventually opening a second studio and launching a mentorship program specifically for young designers from underserved communities, ensuring that no one who walked through her doors would ever be made to feel that where they came from determined where they could go. And on quiet mornings, when sunlight poured through the windows of the studio she had built entirely on her own terms, Amara would sometimes glance at that magazine cover framed on her wall, not as a symbol of vindication against the man who once left her, but as a reminder that she had never once needed him to see her worth, because she had finally learned to see it herself.